Hi, I'm Katrina. I'm the head of teen services at the Valley Cottage Library in Rockland County.
And I'm Katie. I am the head of technical services and a programming librarian at the Valley Cottage Library.
So this presentation will explore how to go about building a circulating board game collection for your library. We'll include some tips and tricks for organizing, cataloging, in-house usage for programming, and we'll cover how we built and expanded our collection, challenges we encountered, how we worked around them, and we'll share resources for game selection and acquisition, as well as an outline of our processes in organizing and labeling the games for ease of patron use. And we'll provide our information so you can contact us if you have questions about starting, expanding, or reconfiguring your own collection.
So first of all, let's start with why board games are a great collection to include in a public library. If you need buy-in from administration, they're great for a wide variety of ages, from families with small kids to older folks, and really anyone in between. We've been seeing more study in this area about how gaming and learning for teens are a really great fit and for people of all ages. And let's not forget that you can also just relax and have fun and connect with your patrons through board games.
All right, so where do you start if you have no games, maybe, or only a few? So personally, we play a decent amount of board games. So we had a pretty good idea of what kind of games were out there already. But if there's a game that you've seen your patrons play in the library or talk about with you, you could ask your colleagues if any of them are gamers. I'm willing to bet you've maybe got one board gamer on your library staff.
Oh, definitely.
So community observation. Also, the Amazon bestsellers list is a pretty good place just to kind of gauge what the majority of people are interested in. Indie game companies, Board Game Geek, which is a great resource that we'll talk more about, and go play some games. Go play some games.
So first we'll talk about acquiring games. One of the many hurdles that libraries face when starting board game collections is that board games are not available through book distributors that offer the deep discounts that we receive when we purchase books. That said, it doesn't have to be expensive. We just have to be a little bit more creative in how we plan and acquire our collections. So one of the things that I do suggest is build a relationship with your local game store if you have one. Sometimes they will offer discounts to libraries. They will absolutely have opinions about what's popular among people of all ages. And they may even be willing to partner with the library on programming. So that's a really excellent resource if you do have a game store in your community. Most libraries already have accounts with Amazon. So Amazon has tons and tons of board games for sale, sometimes for discounts. Sometimes they go on really good sales, so keep an eye on it. But because the library generally already has these relationships, it makes it easy to pay for the games, which can be a tricky thing otherwise. You can ask for donations from indie board game publishers, and I will talk about this a little bit more later. But you might be able to get some games for free. And some board game publishers do have arrangements to provide discounts for libraries that are kind of similar to the discounts that we get through our book distributors. That's getting a little bit more popularity, and publishers like Stonemaier and Calliope Games are among the few that have these setups, but it looks like there are more and more that are doing this all the time.
And then big box stores like Target or Barnes and Noble also have board game collections, but you're probably going to be paying retail.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say they're not nearly as cheap. So donations. you can approach donations in a few different ways, but I must warn you that they probably work a little differently after COVID. We started this collection pre-COVID, so it was, I think not everybody was hurting quite as much financially. So I think it was easier for some people to say yes to us. So you can start by accepting donations from staff. I personally would not necessarily open up those donations to the public, because a lot of anybody who accepts book donations, you know, you're not always going to get something in good condition or something that you want or duplicates. I would say start with staff and see if anybody has any board games lying around that they don't want to hang on to anymore. Next, you can do what I did when we started this collection, is send emails to the independent publishers to ask for donations. Don't bother sending them to Hasbro. You'll get nothing. But a lot of the smaller independent publishing companies are pretty excited about having their games in libraries. Expect mixed results. Not everybody will say yes. You will get some that enthusiastically agree, ask you which of their games you want, and send them off in the mail that day. Some will send you a box of games without even responding, and many will say no or not respond. That's totally normal. As I said, this only works with indie game publishers. But they're generally the pretty easy ones to work with. And as I said before, several publishers do have the library discount arrangements.
Okay, so this was probably the most difficult part of the collection. It's a step you don't necessarily have to take, but I do think it makes a big difference. At least it has for our collection. So what I really wanted to do was create a system to help patrons figure out what they were looking at, because most of the people checking out games weren't necessarily board gamers. So I wanted to give them a sense of what they were getting into, and B, an indicator of how difficult it was going to be for them to learn and or teach. The problem is that there are a ton of ways that you can categorize games, and there are subcategories within those categories. So I couldn't have too many categories because that would just be more confusing, but I needed a few to kind of give someone broad strokes. So I considered things like game themes, mechanics. You know, is it a farming game? Is it a cooperative game? How many players were required? Should I just have a category for, you know, just 2-player games? I wanted to make sure that everything I had already and everything that we would potentially acquire in the future could feasibly fit in to these categories. So this is what I ended up with. This is just a template from Library Aware. We played around with the colors and the fonts because the colors come into play in shelving. And just like I kind of came up with a very quick little catchphrase for each of the categories. So you kind of, okay, so you might know what a strategy game is, or, you know, what a party game is, but I kind of wanted to give people a little additional explanation. Yeah. And then the other part of that was the difficulty rating. I think a lot of people can be put off by something when it doesn't meet their expectations. So I didn't want someone to come along and see a cool looking game like Dead of Winter, which is a great game, and say, oh, cool zombies, and then feel utterly bewildered and frustrated because it's not a simple game to learn. So this was another place that Board Game Geek really helped me, because they do assign difficulty ratings based on community response on a 1 to 5 scale. So I kind of took those ratings into account when I was assigning difficulty for the games that we had also, and I made it a little simpler. So this is what I ended up with. This guide, again, made in Library Aware. It's got our library branding on it. This was the scale that made the most sense to me, and I think it's been helpful for patrons, and it is posted, you know, right next to collection so that they can get a quick idea of how difficult a game is going to be to learn, or maybe it's not appropriate for your 8-year-old, but you and your friends might love it. So
yeah. So one of the big things that helps us a lot is the way that we have labeled and processed the games. So I brought a game here, Azul. So you can see that it is labeled with our library's name. Do not put it in the book drop. Do not allow board games to ever go in your book drop because they will get crushed and destroyed very quickly. Our books have all been reinforced, or our boxes have all been reinforced with book tape. We do circulate them in the original boxes. They're more eye-catching, good for browsing that way. But what I really want to show you is what we have done to process them. Here we have a list of components that come with each game. So that way we know that there are, you know, a certain number of tiles and a certain number of boards and a certain number of all sorts of things. The barcode is on the inside of the box so that when they get checked in, our circulation staff knows to look for each of the things in that contents list. And then we have a little grid where we can have people inventory them from time to time and make sure that everything is here, and then they will sign off on it and date it. Inside, if we have just a single page rule book, we'll laminate it. That doesn't count for this one. You know, boards, but this is really kind of what I wanted to show you. Some components actually fit into the box itself, but we have separated everything out into little plastic baggies and labeled each individual thing. This is a tedious process when you get started. I mean, even everything down to the little first tile or first player tile has its own baggie and is labeled so that when things are getting checked in, CERC staff can just go, okay, they're the blue tiles, here are the black tiles. It makes it much easier to make sure that things are not missing. So that's sort of what we do on our end to make sure that things are processed properly. But the most frequent question I get about this is, but won't the pieces get lost? And the answer is yes, they will on occasion. It doesn't happen all the time, but this labeling process that I just showed you prevents this. Everything has a place to go. Everything has a number on it. The contents list is in the box, and it also sort of provides some accountability for the people checking things out. If they received everything in good order, they should put it back in good order. Secondly, patrons will tell you if something goes missing. We've been a little bit lax on charging for missing pieces because I think for the most part, the people that discover them aren't the ones who lost them. But it's not that hard to get replacement pieces. Many indie publishers will send replacement pieces for little to no money. I think the maximum I've seen them ask for is like $5 for replacement pieces. Again, same thing. Don't bother the big publishers with it. They won't send you anything. But for those major manufacturers, some of those pieces are replacement pieces are available on Amazon for purchase. If all else fails, you can buy a new copy of the game and then make sure you save the leftover pieces that are still there from the old one for replacements in case things go missing again. Additionally, some of the indie publishers will actually provide extra pieces in the box starting up. I think we received a copy of Catan, Settlers of Catan, and it had basically double the pieces you needed. So we stashed those, and if we ever lose anything,
We're good to
we have
go.
more. Also, if you have a maker space, use those 3D printers. There are designs out there for everything, and game pieces are all over. So that makes it much easier to replace something if you absolutely have to make it. And then lastly, I showed you the grid that we have on the inside of the box. We have volunteers count pieces. We get a lot of volunteers. We don't always have a lot to do. So we can have volunteers count pieces and then sign off that everything is there. And then that's not something that's on any major schedule. It's just kind of when we think of it, and when we can get that done.
Okay, where do you put them? I know that space is always a concern. I get it. I really do. And that could even factor into your collection process. Like, okay, you only have space for, card games, and that's fine. You do what you can. In our case, we started out on top of a low shelf that we had right behind the information desk. And that just got a little tricky because as we added more games, it kind of looked it started getting chaotic up there. And then also patrons either didn't feel comfortable walking behind the information desk or felt really, really comfortable behind the information desk, which it just wasn't working anymore. So what ended up happening was a good amount of our print magazines were kind of weeding themselves as they went to digital. So we were able to take the part of the shelving out and use that space to relocate the games. I think it looks so much nicer. I think it's neater. It's less distracting to look at. The boxes, because they're together, are less likely to come apart, or the edges kind of stay nicer. You can see all the labels. I think it just works a lot better this way. So if you can shelve them, I would recommend it. It's kind of surprising how many, this is over 100 games probably in this picture right here, and it's only the 2 shelves. We did consider splitting the collection and housing some in the children's room, just so adults who don't normally kind of venture into the main library and just go to the children's room could still be aware of the collection. We didn't end up doing that, but that's another strategy that might work for you if you have a very limited space in some areas.
So budget and time commitment can vary widely. It can be flexible for what works with your library. I would say time commitment, have a really good tech services person like I do, who is really good at being creative in how to process these games.
Yeah, the biggest time sink for me in the beginning was coming up with the whole categories and difficulties and then deciding how to label everything. But now that we kind of have that system in place and we divide the work, so I'll purchase a game and then I'll kind of take it apart and bag everything that I want to be bagged and write out what should be on the label, and then I can hand it over to Katie's department, who can tape the box, print the labels, and now that we have all the templates in place, the process is a lot smoother. And you're always going to get the weird ones that you kind of have to come up with creative solutions for, but that's kind of fun too.
It is.
But definitely invest in bulk, like tiny plastic bags for your pieces.
It makes it so much easier for everything.
Yeah.
And then as far as budget is concerned, you can really cater it to whatever you have. I think our initial collection, I would say more than half of it was donated. And I think the first bunch of games that I bought for programming stuff, I think at most cost $150 for that initial 7 or 8 games that we bought. You can really be selective.
You can. some additional considerations, obviously, if you're going to make this part of a circulating collection, you know, you want to determine how many can someone borrow for how long, how many like what kind of fines or damage costs you're attaching to it. We don't, like Katie said before, we really don't charge. I mean, if you come back and, you know, you drop the entire game in the ocean, I guess that's a different conversation.
Or if you have, 4 game boards and one suddenly goes missing.
You know, that's a tougher thing, but
Yeah.
again, very customizable for your library. Our personal circulation rules, a patron can take 2 games for a week. That seems to be working.
Yeah,
for
nobody's
us.
had any complaints.
No one's had any complaints, seems to work for people. The limited use items was one of the challenges we came across. So, for instance, if you are familiar with the game Clue, every player has a little sheet of paper where you check things off to kind of, you know, eliminate your suspects and whatnot. So what we actually did was we photocopied one of those sheets, we blew it up a little bit, and then we laminated them and included dry erase markers in the box so that we kind of turned a limited use item into a reusable item. And, you know, you might have to fix those up occasionally, but it's better, I think, than having people just go through the paper and then you have to find a new Clue checklist.
So when we did that, we kept the original pads someplace where we keep all our spare pieces and all of that, so that if they do wear out, we can just replace them really easily by running another set through the laminator. So programming for adults. This was initially how this collection started. From adult programming, we wanted to have game nights. So we said, okay, well, let's buy a few games and host a game night. And people showed up, like a lot of people showed up. So we eventually expanded. But what I suggest doing is keep it casual. Provide an array of games, let people bring their own. We've even had times where we had a game designer show up and bring a prototype of his game that was in the process of being published. Keep it to a fun atmosphere, let people sort of self-select what they're interested in, and they will play until the library closes, and then some of you let them. So I've learned that party games are great for big groups. Be selective with what you use, but I mean, the more the merrier for the party games, I find a lot of the time. I also suggest learning a few games in advance so you can show others how to play if you want to try something out and see how it works out with a group. It's always nice to sort of have an ambassador for a particular game if it's something a little bit more challenging. Yeah,
it works.
It works.
You might not think like a bunch of adults want to come play board games.
They show up in droves.
They do. So it's something to consider. And then because I am the teen librarian here, I'm gonna throw it out for board gaming with teens. Play testing it first, I think, is important for adults and goes double for teens. But you definitely want to give them options as well. And then just look at the size and age range of your group. Like here's a picture of my personal favorite board game, Orcam Horror, which is also a great example of something that I would not put out because it generally takes probably between 2 or 3 hours to play and it's difficult to learn. But you know, you kind of see who you get, and then party games are really good. I found that teens are really like the kind of old school games, like Categories has struck a chord with them. So
it is a really fun one.
It is a fun one. So something else to consider.
So lots of board games can be good for a collection.
Definitely. So these are just a few, and we kind of tried to go in a couple of different categories. But I would say all of these are great starter board games for a collection because it kind of hits a bunch of different notes. And also these are some of our most circulated games at our location. I think cooperative games are great. I love playing cooperative games. They tend to be a little easier to learn, I think, because
Everybody's kind of working
everyone's working
together.
together. So I think that's another good option, especially for programming, to all be on the same team if you're trying to figure something out. And great games.
The simple and fun ones are the ones that I see happening most frequently at the adult board game programs. People yell at each other, smashing monsters in King of Tokyo. We have some regulars who show up to play Ticket to Ride every single time. I have seen some very hated games of Sushi Go, but that's a nice one because it fits. It's like over and done with in maybe 10 minutes, and it's very easy to learn. So,
Yeah,
that works for us.
here's just our idea of some great starter board games.
Also, Ticket to Ride is our most circulated board game.
Yes.
Just
It is.
so here are some useful resources and some things that we had talked about before. The ALA Games and Gaming Roundtable is a really great resource. There is an actual roundtable that's meant entirely for librarians revolving around games. So excellent. They also run the League of Librarian Gamers Facebook page, which is an incredible resource as well, because people are asking questions like, how do you circulate this particular game and its crazy components? Or what has been most popular in your library? And as librarians tend to be, we are all very well, used to sharing information with each other. So that's a really great place to start as well. Board Game Geek, as Katrina said, is a huge resource. It is sort of the master list of all of the games that are out there and then some. There are ratings, there are reviews, there are links to videos on how to play things, all sorts of stuff on there. It's packed full of information. Dice Tower is also really useful in that it provides videos for how to learn the games as well that are concise and easy to follow. And then lastly, Board Game Arena is a fun way to learn a lot of games. It is a completely online sort of board game simulator that actually looks good. But they have a lot of tutorials, and then you can play with people all over the world. So that was how I learned a lot of the games that we have in the collection here.
Great, thank you. We love games. We love talking about games. We love talking about games in libraries. So here's our information. Please feel free to reach out to one or both of us, and we'd be happy to chat more with you.
Yeah. And good luck with your game collection.
Thank you.